I hope you have a bit better understanding now of the causes of climate change and what it means. And now we're going to look at the impacts of it. And before we do that, we get moving a little bit again with one more poll. And here the question is, I experience climate change around me. So again, you can say yes or no. And this is a really personal question. So I would really enjoy also hearing your stories. The poll is on. But if you want to share, if you have any experiences and you want to share them, please do so in the chat or by raising your hand, and then we can hear a bit from each other. I'll give you a few more seconds to answer the poll and maybe type any experiences in the chat, because I'm seeing that 93% of the people who replied say they experience climate change around me. That's actually really a lot. And 7% say they don't experience it. So I'm really happy for you, actually. I don't see any reactions yet. Maybe I can tell one story myself. I experience it. I have a little garden at home, and actually this March, it has been the driest month on record that has been measured in the Netherlands. So I really noticed that my plants are not too happy with that. Luckily, I don't depend on the production, but it's quite worrisome. I see here some reactions. In Kenya recently, people do plant early in the year because it's always raining. Guess who fumbled this year? Yeah, that's really horrible. So I'm guessing you mean the rains are late and now we have a problem. And Hassan, I saw the seasons get more and more extreme and they happen sooner than expected. So you're saying that even you're seeing it change more quickly than you would have expected. So yeah, we see that a bit as well, that we have all these projections, but sometimes we are wrong, or we actually emitting more than we agreed upon. So then the climate changes more quickly. Okay, so let's. I see one more, or two more actually. Growing up, we had 2 rivers in the village. I went back recently and just rocks where the big rivers were. So we see an effect of rivers drying up. We'll talk a bit about that later as well. And droughts are now more frequent. So to start with those droughts, so we're going to look at some hazards and what the effects are of those on our daily lives. And the IPCC that Sophie talked about before also does predictions or statements on the change of these hazards. And so drought is one of them. And what IPCC predicts is that more regions will be affected by increases in droughts. So the regions that are affected by drought will be more. And also the regions that were already affected by drought might see more droughts or more heavy droughts. And well, droughts are something that have always been happening, but as I said, the frequency increases more, or the heaviness. This is an example of a really heavy drought. I think most of you are familiar with in the Horn of Africa, where only in Kenya 4 million people were in need of food. But also last season, for example, in Ghana and Zimbabwe, we had pretty bad droughts. So we already see them happening around us. And actually, exactly what one of you said in the chat, we also see slower effects. So drought is also slowly drying up lakes and rivers. And these maybe impacts us less quickly. Like when there's a drought for agriculture, we immediately don't have enough food. But here it really impacts the whole ecosystem, which in the end impacts us as humans as well. So those are 2 examples, and there are many more effects. I just listed 6 here, but we can see that we lose our sources of incomes, crops and livestock, but also water availability for us as well as our animals. And this causes sometimes people to be forced to migrate. But if we look at the system, we also see these longer term impacts. So we see a loss of biodiversity, the soil, the quality of the soil degrades, and sometimes there's even more disasters happening because of drought, such as wildfires. So that was a bit about drought. If you have any questions, put them in the chat, so we will come back to them later. And I know this is a little bit depressing, but in the end, we will end with a positive note. But the next effect we see is extreme heat. I don't know if some of you sometimes feel like this bear, but the IPCC says that the length, frequency, and intensity of heat waves will increase. So that's quite some things, but it means that only it's not more frequent, but it also might be more intense. So maybe a heat wave was first 40 degrees and it becomes 45 degrees. And when we're talking about heat, that is the hazard that we are most certain about that this will actually happen. What is interesting about heat, it's very related to drought as well. They can happen at the same time, but heat also has different impacts than drought. And one of them is that heat can have a huge impact on urban areas, actually. Because in the urban areas, there's a lot of buildings which capture the heat, so it warms up way more quickly, and people don't always have cool places to go to. There's often little green houses might not be built for extreme heat. And in combination with a lot of migration we see from rural to urban areas, this can really become a problem. And actually, slowly there's more attention to heat. So first it was mainly focused on drought and flooding as impacts, but now we really see that heat becomes like this silent killer. And this is already happening as well, directly impacting us. For example, meningitis is a disease that we see that has more often outbreaks when there's extreme heat due to low humidity and dust and these kind of things. So that's already a problem, and we can expect those kind of disease outbreaks to happen more often. So it has a very direct impact on human health, but it also has other impacts, for example, on work productivity, power might be a problem. And then it again has similar impacts as drought on the things we grow and the resources we need. So we talked a lot about dryness and temperature now, and now we go a little bit to the opposite, which might be a bit contradicting. But it's like Sophie said, that maybe the amount of rain might stay the same, but it can come in a very short period. So extreme rain is another problem we face with climate change. And so again, IPCC says that actually, yes, the frequency and intensity of heavy rains will increase. So there can be more drought and more heavy rain at the same time. And with heavy rain, it can really impact infrastructure very directly. This is an example in Zimbabwe of 2 months ago. So really, it can cut off villages. Your stores can be flooded, or roads can be destroyed. Oh, sorry. And it's actually interesting that some of these hazards also build upon each other. So, for example, when there is a drought and then there's very heavy rain, the chance of flooding increases. Because the soil cannot take up the water anymore. So we also have to think about that. So again, this is a little bit of an overview of those effects. We can also have landslides and a lot of similar effects actually as the other hazards. Then we have one more hazard, which is sea level rise. So not all countries have to deal with it, but it is a very global phenomenon that might impact a lot, actually. And so IPCC says that the sea level rise is unavoidable. And what's also interesting about this is that it will not decrease very quickly anymore once it's there. So it will have effects for thousands of years. And for example, on the coast of West Africa, there's really, the land is quite low. And they say that, especially with also the migration to urban areas, by 2030, so that's pretty quick, around 116 million people could live in densely populated, low-lying coastal areas in Africa. So that's quite a bit. And when there's sea rise, it's very intuitive to imagine that parts of the land disappear, so people lose their houses. But it also impacts, for example, the life in the sea, like corals cannot grow in the same places anymore, and it can cause other disasters as flooding and storm surges. And then there's one more hazard, which is storms or tropical cyclones. And again, it might not surprise you anymore now, but again, they predict that this will increase the proportion and the intensity. So again, we already have them. There's an example that was horrible, Cyclone Ida in Zimbabwe. And I think what is very particular about this effect is that it takes a long time to rebuild after it. So there's a lot of damage to infrastructure and very direct loss of lives of humans as well as livestock, for example. And because it's so sudden onset, it also can be very heavy mentally. So I think that's sometimes also something we should not forget. If you suddenly lose your home or your the people dearest to you, it's really, really heavy. So that's what I wanted to say about the impacts. And I surely mentioned it before, but I think it's important to remember that climate change is one of the causes of these horrible effects. But often it is a combination of causes that lead to an effect. So, for example, this article says that all the countries in Africa are actually water insecure. And one of the drivers of this water insecurity is climate change. But because of the combination with population growth and pollution, we really have a problem. So that's always good to keep in mind.